Hello, let's continue on with decimals by talking about their place value. Just like whole numbers have a place value, so do decimals. So at the beginning of the year, we talked about whole numbers. So for instance, if I had the number 326, the 3 has a value of 300. The 2 has a value of 20 because it's two tens. And then the 6 has a value of 6 because it's in the ones place. Decimals have place values as well. So for instance, if I had a 2 on the right side, this decimal is kind of like a barrier. So on the left side of the decimal are where whole numbers belong. Here's the decimal point. And on the right side of the decimal are where fraction pieces or decimals belong. And these ones are numbers that are under 1, that are smaller than 1. So here I have 2 tenths. The first slot after my decimal point is the tenths slot. It goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths, which matches the pattern here that goes tens, hundreds, thousands. The only difference is there's no ones on the right side of the decimal. It goes right into tenths. So we're going to see that as we keep going. All right. On these examples, there are 3 sections: decimal, model, and fraction. They're all equivalents of the same number, but we have a fraction version, the model version, and then we're going to make the decimal version together. So looking at the model, I have 10 equal pieces. That gives me my denominator here of 10. 3 of those pieces are shaded, which gives me my numerator of 3. To make the decimal, I'm going to start by making the decimal point, which is the same thing if you're typing it as a period. The 3 belongs in the tenths place, which if you remember from the slide here, is the first place value slot after the decimal point. I can also write it with a 0 after it, because just like if I were to have a 2 in the ones place and I tacked a 0 on here, that doesn't make it a new number. This is still the number 2. With decimals, I can kind of do the same thing, but it's a backwards order. So if I have a 2 here in the tenths, I could put a 0 here, and that number is still 2 tenths. It looks funny, but it works. Let's move on to our next slide. This one is 6 tenths. I have 6 pieces shaded out of 10 equal pieces. The decimal, I'm going to start with the decimal, and I'm going to put 6 in the tenths place, 6 tenths. Or I can do that thing with the 0 on the end. And this is still 6 tenths. Both of these answers are correct. Something I want to mention is that 6 tenths in its fraction form could be simplified if I divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. I would get 3/5. The really cool thing about decimals is that you don't ever have to simplify. You just work with the decimal as is, and that's kind of cool. Let's jump into mixed numbers. Here I have this entire model filled in, which would be a whole number, and the fraction piece, and together they make the mixed number. So I have one whole number represented here, and then 4 pieces shaded, that's here, out of the 10, which is my denominator. All together is my mixed number, and I can represent that as a decimal. I have one whole, and wholes go on the left side of the decimal point. And then the fraction piece, this part of the mixed number, will be represented on the right side of the decimal. So it's 4 tenths. I can still put a 0 on the end and have it be the same value. Both of these would be correct. Whole numbers on the left side, decimal point. Fraction pieces on the right side. When I say this number, it's 1 and the decimal point means and 4/10. You say the digit and then the place value that it's in. 1 and 4/10. Okay. Here's another example. Almost the exact same as before. It's just a different fraction. And again, I don't have to simplify. So I'm going to have 1 whole and 8/10. 1 whole and 8/10. Both are correct. The 8 is in the tenths place of the decimal. 8/10, 8/10. Okay, something I want to mention is that I could have a larger digit as a whole number than 1. Here, this shows that I have 3 wholes, and this is supposed to show 9/10. It's hard to see, but I wrote it as a fraction, 9/10. So I would write this as a decimal starting with my whole number, 3 and 9/10, or 3 and 9/10. Both would be correct with or without that extra 0. But this digit here, my whole number, could be larger than 1. And the last thing I'm going to mention is decimal points only come in tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. We're only going to be working with tenths for a long time, but 6/8 or like 3/4, some of the fractions that you are used to working with will not be any of the decimals that we will have to now work with. Those are only fractions. You will only be using denominator of 10. So like 3/10, which would be 3/10. Much easier. All right, good luck with your formatives and let us know if we can help you in any